What is going on, gunfighters? So by studying analytics, I discovered that Mondays are by far the most popular day. The other days are okay, and for some reason Friday is not popular at all. So in order to do better, what I'm going to do is try and get out 2 podcasts on Monday, one of Alpha Male Podcast and one of Gunfighter Life. And then Friday to do a recast of an earlier episode. Now that I know a little bit more about audio, by God's grace, and improving audio quality, I'll take some of the older episodes, hopefully, and improve them. Even with the improvements, hopefully, you'll appreciate the better audio now and put those out, especially because, by God's grace, there's a lot of new listeners. Maybe you don't go back and listen to the older episodes. That being said, to help improve the analytics, make sure you're subscribed to Alpha Male Podcast and Gunfighter Life, and hopefully Simple Man Sermons. With that, I'm going to put in this older episode on Glocks. Hopefully you enjoy it. Thanks.
Hello. Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center from a Judeo-Christian worldview and real-world first-hand experience. As always, I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. Don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life and everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. A little quick bio before we roll into the topic, which today is going to be Glocks. If you want to skip ahead, you can skip to around 3.5 minutes in. That should get you pretty close. But I'm going to speak off the cuff, shoot from the hip today because I'm in the mobile studio driving back from a large metropolitan area because the nearest airport to where I live is several hours away, and I just dropped my wife off to go see her family for Thanksgiving. And I figured, why not do something productive with my time in this steel and glass enclosure that I'm in and share some knowledge with you. So with that, roll into the bio and then into the topic. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After that, I was an urban warfare, desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. My primary MOS for both was infantry. So 0351 Assaultman, which as I understand does not exist anymore in the Marine Corps, specialized infantry and demolitions. And then also served as a 79 Tango in the Army. 11 Bravo was my primary. And then a 19 Kilo briefly in 1st Cav. I guess I should say expert rifle and pistol shooter in the military. What else? Going on for the military, I served in LAPD. I was an regular patrol officer, regular police officer. I served in regular assignments, and I also served more specialized assignments. Also worked with the feds. I was a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've also been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area, the commander of a special response team where our primary job was to stop active shooters. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Both rifle and pistol state champions, and I've been a regional rifle champion for the entire West Coast. I've been very blessed in my life to use the talents that God's given me, and I'm very humbled that God has given me those talents. I can't do anything without Him, and I give Him all the glory. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Let's see, otherwise I've been a professional hunter and guide. Not many people today can say that, but I have professionally hunted things and guided things, buffalo and elk, and slain all manner of beasts, whether professionally or on my own. Wolves and bear and, like I said, all manner of beast, exotic animal, fallow deer. I may be forgetting some stuff, but I'm going to roll in pretty close to the topic already. If you can't tell, I'm a little tired. I woke up at 2-something or 3-something this morning to take my wife to the airport, and I've been driving for quite some time on my way back now. And so if I seem a little choppy, that's why. There's no editing on this for you guys that have listened for a while. This is a throwback to the days of yore when we did this just talking in the iPhone and uploading it before there were people supporting the podcast, and that's pretty much what I did on my drive to a, let's just call it a top secret facility for the federal government. I had a very long drive every day, and that's kind of how the genesis of this got started. So a little throwback to that for you guys that have listened that long. I appreciate you. And thanks to all the people that support on Patreon. With that, let's talk about today's topic, the Glocks. Okay, so, with Glocks, the way that I talk about Glocks is I say that they're the Honda Civic of handguns. And what I mean by that is a couple of things. One, they're foreign. They're made in a different country. Number two, they work. They're generally seen as some of the most reliable, either handguns or vehicles. So they are reliable. They do work. They're probably about a mid-price point. They're not super expensive. They're not the Ferrari, and they're not the, Kia. They're right in the middle, and they have a good value. And they work. They're kind of like the most common, and Glocks certainly are the most common as far as handguns go. I don't know if this stat is correct, but I've heard that they make up 60% of the entire handgun market in the U.S., and the other 40% is all other handguns. I've heard that before. I don't know how true that is, but you can check the stats out for yourself on that if there is even a way to get, legit stats on that. But they do certainly make up a large portion of the handgunning market. And another way they're like the Honda Civic is they get pimped out a lot, and by that I mean they get accessorized a lot. You could get a Honda Civic and get all kinds of accessories for them, and you can do the same with a Glock. In fact, I would say a lot of people that, unless they just buy it because they want to have a gun and they don't really intend to shoot it, most people that have Glocks, they generally tend to trick them out or accessorize them in a lot of different ways. So, in that way, I liken them to the Honda Civic of handguns. Now, as with guns, as with anything in life, we all have our biases and our favorites, and I'm not going to try and hide that. Hopefully mine are based on real-world first-hand experience as it pertains to me. But I'm going to let you know that Glocks are not my favorite. They're not my favorite handgun. I will tell you that I own Glocks. I have won more Glocks than I can remember. As I said, I've won more shooting competitions than I can remember. And a lot of competitions that give away Glocks, and that's great. And I have won quite a few. I've won more Glocks, I think, than I own after, winning a shooting competition. But I still have a few. And I will say, admittedly, that one of my go-to EDC everyday carry guns, especially for urban environments when I have to be in them, is a Glock 26. The original baby Glock. And that one I have accessorized, and it is ridiculously accurate for a Glock. I can make headshots with it at 50 yards, and if I miss, it's me, not the gun. And that's a ridiculously accurate gun, but most Glocks I don't think are that accurate, and they are not my favorites. I'll harken back to the original Glock that I owned that was issued to me by LAPD when I worked for LAPD. When I went to work for LAPD after getting out of the Marine Corps, they issued me a Glock 22, which I think is probably one of the worst handguns, or at least common handguns. I'm not a big fan of the 40 Smith & Wesson either. And if you like the 40, that's fine, but I don't. I started out with the 40, and I quickly thought back in the day that 45 must be better, so I switched to Glock 21, and then realized that my hands were not big enough to shoot that thing correctly, meaning that I could not have the front sight in line with my wrist, in line with my elbow, in line with my shoulder, and have my finger rest squarely on the target with the center of the pad on the center of the trigger, which is very important for fast, accurate shooting and for natural aiming. So anyway, the Glock 22 that I started out with, that gun has a lot of recoil. I don't per se dislike the 40 Smith & Wesson. I dislike that they shove it in guns originally intended for the 9mm and give you far more recoil. And I don't think the trade-off for the massive amount of recoil increase, which to me seems even more than the 45, because it's much snappier in my opinion, which I don't like. And again, like I said, we all have our favorites, and the 40 is not one of mine. I think if you put the 40 in something like a 9mm, it's a fine round. But if you're going to put it in a 1911, I misspoke, as I said, I'm tired. If you put the 40 Smith & Wesson in a 1911, it's a fine caliber. But if you're going to put it in a 1911, why not put 10mm in a 1911? So, with that said, the Glock 22 is quite a bit snappy, and I would not recommend it, or the Glock 23 for that matter. So that was my first foray. Maybe that left a bad taste in my mouth for the Glock. But I will concede the Glocks are reliable. So let's talk about why Glocks are so popular. And I read a book, or I should say I listened to an audio book on the history of the Glock company, and it came to realize that a lot of the reason Glocks are so popular is not because Glock is the best handgun. It's really because Glock and Gaston Glock and the Glock company is great at marketing. And that's awesome. I mean, I'm not going to put them down for that. They're great at marketing. They're a great company. They're great at business. He took that relatively, small company that he used to make curtain rods and the Glock knife, if you're not familiar with it, a knife maker, and won the Austrian Army contract for their handgun. And he quickly came to the U.S. and through business savvy and marketing came to dominate the U.S. handgun market. I'm not going to put anybody down for that. That's a great, immigrant success story. And I'm happy for Gaston Glock, and I'm happy for the Glock company. And he brought a lot of business to the U.S. And that gun has served alongside many military and police. And I'm not going to denigrate that. I'm just saying I think that it's so popular because the company was great at business, not because it was the best handgun. The handgun is reliable, it does work, but that doesn't make it the best. It's also fairly inexpensive. And you keep in mind that what you pay for that handgun is probably far more than what a police officer or what a police department pays for that handgun. Like I said, business savvy, they generally will give good prices to law enforcement agencies, knowing that if law enforcement and the FBI and things like that adopt the Glock, that most civilians will too. And the civilian market is far larger. And that's, like I said, business savvy. So if they cut a police department a great deal, over something like an HKP7, then they adopt the Glock. And then civilians say, oh, the police carry Glocks. And most civilians erroneously think that most police officers are good gunfighters. And they think, oh, if that's what they carry, that's probably a good gun and that I should carry. So anyway, that's what I think some of the things about Glock and how they've become so prevalent and so popular. That being said, Glocks do work, they are reliable. Like I said, they're kind of the Honda Civic. They're kind of the standard that all other handguns are measured against for reliability. And as you mentioned, the 40 Smith & Wesson, the 40 Smith & Wesson and the Glock are kind of intertwined in that it was developed by Smith & Wesson and they had a gun developed for it, but Glock kind of beat them to the market. Like I said, good business savvy, good business model. And they kind of beat Glock to the market with a popular, affordable, reliable 40 Smith & Wesson. Now, some of the early Glock 40s did have problems. They did blow up. That's a real thing. You want to look that up. They fixed that problem. But anyway, they were kind of first to the market with a reliable, affordable 40 Smith & Wesson handgun back at the time when people thought the 9mm wasn't good enough. So that's another reason they came to dominate the handgun market, because the police were switching to 40. They wanted 40 after the Miami shootout. Maybe I should do an episode on the Miami shootout. But for whatever reason, they decided 40 was the new hotness, and they wanted a gun chambered in it, and Glock was really there with an affordable, reliable 40 Smith & Wesson handgun, and they came to dominate that. So, although the original model, which is still my favorite model of Glock, is the Glock 17, and I think if you're going to get a Glock, that's a great place to start. Kind of what brought them popular in the U.S., I believe, was the Glock 22, which was my original issue duty handgun. And so let's talk about the quintessential Glock 17, which is the full-size 9mm. That was the original handgun. It's called the Glock 17, from what I understand, not because it holds 17 rounds. That's just a coincidence. It's because it was the 17th model. Hence, the smaller version that came out later, the Glock 19, was the 19th model. If you don't know, the 18 is the full auto version that we generally can't have here in the U.S. But the Glock 17 is the full-size 9mm handgun, and I think for most people, for most situations, that's still probably the best choice, unless you're concealed carrying. The Glock 19 is probably more popular for civilians because it is kind of that sweet spot size. It's kind of that size that's big enough to shoot well, but not so big that you can't conceal carry it for a lot of people. And then moving down from that, you have the Glock 26, which, as I mentioned, was the original baby Glock, which is the subcompact 9mm double stack, not the super subcompacts that they have today. So those are all good, reliable 9mm handguns. And then the 40 Smith & Wesson came out, I think somewhere, well, if we go by models and designation, I guess it came after the Glock 19. So they were developing the Glock 20, which is in 10mm, and then the 40 Smith & Wesson came out, and they quickly developed the Glock 22. We'll get back to the 21 later. But the Glock 22, which was in 40 Smith & Wesson, like I said, at the time when law enforcement was adopting that. And then the compact version of that, the Glock 19 size in the 40 Smith & Wesson, is the Glock 23. So those are your probably most common, at least until recently. Also, since we're in America, we talk about the 45. The second handgun I bought, I guess the first handgun I bought on my own for duty use would have been the Glock 21, which is the 45. Double stack 45. I'm kind of a 1911 guy. Like I said, we all have our favorites, and I don't have the 1911 because I love the 1911 or the 45 or whatever. I have it because I shoot it very well. And to me, hitting my target is the number one reason that I have a gun, to protect myself and others, and hitting my target quickly and accurately is important. And the 1911 lets me do that. But the 1911 is in 45. Although I guess about half of mine are in 45 and the other half are in 9mm. Anyway, as I said, I'm tired of getting off topic. The Glock 21 is in 45 ACP. The 45 ACP is a classic American cartridge. So if you want a bigger handgun, if you have bigger hands and you can shoot it well, the Glock 21, and I bought that before the Glock 21 SF existed, the short frame, and before the Gen 4 was ever even a thing with the interchangeable back straps. So maybe it would fit my hand better today, I'm not sure, but I think that I would still shoot the 1911 better, so I don't bother. But the Glock 21 is the 45 double stack. It's a great handgun, and like we briefly mentioned, the Glock 20 in 10mm. If you want a good, reliable, robust handgun, for defense against things bigger than humans, then the Glock 20 might be a good option. They also make compacts and subcompact versions of those 45s, and I'm not super familiar with all the models, so I'm going to skip over those and just say that they do exist. And recently, and I don't know what took them so long, but recently Glock came out with their single stack models. And I will say recently because they did, quite a while ago, have a single stack version of the Glock 45, which I did own, which was a great gun, the Glock 36, which is a single stack 45, which gives you about the same capacity of a 1911 in a much smaller package. So, getting back to the Glocks and the new, more concealable, carryable super subcompacts. Like I said, the Glock 26, which is a double stack 9 subcompact, was the original baby Glock. That's what, years back when you said baby Glock, that's what you were talking about. The Glock 26 and Glock 27 and 9mm and 40 respectively. But then they came out with the single stacks. I believe the Glock 42 was the first, besides the 45 I mentioned, super small concealable subcompact single stack 9mm Glock. The Glock 42 in 380, which is a fine handgun. It's a pretty good handgun. Then they came out with the 43 and 9mm. And I bought one of those when it came out, and I quickly got rid of it. It just didn't shoot well for me. It was snappy. Yeah, I guess in theory it gives you more rounds than the Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum J-frame that I have in my pocket right now. But I didn't shoot it very well. It seemed snappy to me, and it didn't seem to give me any real advantage, and it weighed more than my 357. So I quickly got rid of it, and I don't regret getting rid of it. If I had to pick between the 42 and the 43, even though I think 9 is a far superior caliber, when you get into small guns like that, I think the recoil and management and size of the Glock 42 give it the advantage. So if I had to pick one, I'd go with that. And they recently came out with the 43X, which is kind of like the Glock 19X. I think they went in the wrong direction. I'd rather have a longer barrel and less capacity so I could hit my target on the first couple shots instead of needing more shots. But anyway, they make the Glock 43X for whatever reason. And they also make the Glock 48, which I think the Glock 48 is my favorite of any of the new models. The Glock 48, I don't know why they didn't name it the Glock 19 Slim, because it's basically like a Glock 19 but a single stack, which means that most people can hold it well and handle it well. To me, Glocks kind of feel like holding a 2x4 and shooting it. But the Glock 48 doesn't. It feels more like a 1911. The grip angle's still wrong for me, but it feels more like a 1911, and I think that most people with regular size hands could hold it and shoot it and handle it well. So the Glock 48 is my favorite of the new models. That's a single stack, so it's a slim but not super subcompact. I guess you'd call it a slim compact gun. It's kind of that Glock 19 sweet spot size, but it's thinner. And I don't really get wrapped around the axle on capacity. If you can't get the job done with, 5 to 7 to 10 rounds, then you probably should worry about being a better shot instead of getting more capacity. And I'm not against high capacity. We live in America. If you want to shove a 33 round mag in your Glock and carry it in your waistband, have at it. It's just not my thing. So those are the more common Glocks. Now, Glock makes who knows how many untold models. And I'm not going to talk about all of them. But let's call them the Gucci Glocks. Like I said, a lot of people modify their Glocks, and as I believe the patent on the Gen 3 version of the Glock, and I didn't talk about the generations of Glock, we could get into a whole thing on that. Let's just say that the original Gen 1s I really like, and the newer versions of the Gen 5s are probably my favorite. But the Gen 3, the patent is expired, and it's still a fairly modern design, so a lot of people are copying it and making what I call the Gucci Glocks. The Zev Tech, the Shadow Systems, and I think they're really rectifying some of the shortcomings I see on the Glock. I've described the Glock trigger as dragging a piano down a dirt road. It's just gritty and choppy and not linear, and to me, it's like a staple gun. Like, you push a staple out, but it's not a great thing, especially if you shoot it compared to something like even a cheap 1911 trigger, let alone an exquisite 1911 trigger. It gets the job done, let's put it that way. It gets the gun to go off. But a lot of the Gucci Glocks have really rectified that. Zev Tech is kind of known for their triggers, and now they make entire guns. They kind of built an industry. I believe Zev Tech even got started, and their main thing was making Glock triggers decent. And then they decided to make the entire guns. Shadow Systems is another one. And then Grey Ghost Precisions is another one. And they really, I was going to use a term I probably shouldn't use, but they really make the Glock, I guess I would say, more like a finer handgun. Like a Glock would be more like a 1911 or more like a SIG P226 or, a finer, more expensive, more refined handgun. And that has some advantages. So you can still get one of the great things about the Glock is it makes sturdy, reliable magazines that you can beat up that still work. And that's a big advantage in a gun, and a handgun, and especially in a gun you're going to use, a working man's gun. And you still get to keep that. And because of economy of scale, the magazines are pretty inexpensive. You can get a good Glock magazine from Magpul or from whoever that work very well for $20. Whereas the same magazine for like my STI might cost me $120. Or for a lot of common handguns like a Wilson Combat, it might cost you $45 or $50. Or for a lot of other common handguns, you're probably looking at $40 to $50 for magazines. So you can get magazines for a Glock for half that. And if you do a lot of training, a lot of shooting, that can be a real advantage. So if you're looking at, a Glock, but a little bit nicer, a little bit better trigger, a few other things, you might look at those Gucci Glocks and actually give those a shot. With that, guys, I've been rambling on about Glocks for 20-some minutes, probably, depending on how long the intro took. So, my thoughts on Glocks. They work. They're reliable. Even I carry one, even though I don't particularly like them. I got to give my hats off. They are reliable. Like I said, one of my go-to EDC guns is the Glock 26. The Glock 17, the Glock 19s are iconic. They're still good handguns, whatever generation you get them in. But if you're looking, I would recommend the Gen 5, just because for me, and I don't know if the finger grooves line up for you on the other generations, fine, but they don't line up for me. So I find my fingers sitting right on top of the finger grooves. But I like the Gen 5s for that reason and some other reasons. If you're the kind of guy that's going to do a lot of work to your Glock, I would say stick with the Gen 3s. They're the most accessorizable, I guess, if that's a word. Or maybe I just made it up. I am pretty tired of the generations. They seem to be the most easy to work on, the least complex. So the Gen 3s, if you're really kind of like the home hobbyist and you're getting into Glocks, I would recommend like a Gen 3 Glock 19 or 17. They're prolific in the aftermarket world. So look at those. And I think with that, I'm going to wrap up the main body of the topic. I know I talk fast and I probably ramble today. Like I said, I got up at 3-something in the morning after a few hours of sleep. But I figured I'd do something productive with this time and give you guys some content. So, if you want to support this podcast, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. If you thought this podcast or any other ones were worth $1, you can go there, and for the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo or a fancy city cup of coffee, you can support the podcast. Like I said, this one I just talk into my iPhone and upload it, but most of the ones I actually do some editing and some audio adjustment to make it sound better. And that comes from support from viewers, from listeners. I guess listeners is a better term. Thanks to listeners. And I appreciate that. Recently, we hit a milestone. This is the first time mentioning on the air, I guess. But I recently reached the limit of content on my server. And if it wasn't for support of listeners, I would have probably went back and deleted older episodes and just had the newer ones. Because there's a limit to how much the content provider will supply. In my case, I use Spreaker. And there's a limit to how much you can have on their distribution thing. And I hit that limit. By God's grace, I've been doing this a few years and I hit their limit. And without the generous support of people that listen, I would have just deleted the old content. Maybe you want to go back and listen to some of that older content. So if you want to support the community you're now a part of on Gunfighter Life, like I said, go to goodshepherdtraining.com, scroll down to Patreon, and consider contributing and supporting. If not, listen for free and don't feel guilty about it. You can also support by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review of the podcast. It's greatly appreciated. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. As a thank you for staying tuned till the end of the episode, I'll give you a few tactical tips as it pertains to Glocks. Like I said, I have quite a long history with them. I've run them for a lot of years. And I still run them, especially like my last job where I was the commander of an SRT team. When we would go to training, the majority of my guys would run Glocks. I would encourage them not to, but if they did, that was the most common handgun. So when we go to training, I would a lot of times run a Glock just so they see me run a Glock. So they wouldn't think that I shot great because I had a more expensive gun, because they see the fundamentals of marksmanship being applied. But I have a long history with Glock and I still use them. So one of the tips is for cleaning handguns like a Glock, where you don't have a lot of fine moving parts and they're easy to disassemble. Hot soapy water. go old school, just like you would clean like a black powder muzzle-loading firearm. If you run a lot of rounds to your Glock and it's super dirty, take it in the shower or take it in a sink and clean it with hot soapy water and an old toothbrush you're not going to brush your teeth with anymore. Hot soapy water is a great cleaner for a thing like a Glock. If you're not going to take out the firing pin channel and stuff like that, then don't use hot soapy water in there to get any water stuck in it. But for something like the frame, or if you're going to completely disassemble the upper on the Glock, the slide assembly, if you're going to completely disassemble it, hot soapy water is a quick, easy way. Something like Dawn dish soap and I can't emphasize enough, hot soapy water will really get that clean. And a way to make that even easier is to get something like Rem oil. You spray it on the carbon fouling and stuff first. Let it sit for a few minutes, let's say 3 to 5 minutes or longer if you want. And then hot soapy water. And then when it's dry, hit it with some more oil. There you go. Tactical tip. Greatly saves cleaning time, and it's easy and it's cheap. And who doesn't like that? Another tactical tip, they make this stuff called Hyperlube. It's for car engines. It's like a lubricant additive. It's really thick. Now, they make this stuff in competition shooting circles called Slide Glide. It's great. But in my opinion, Hyperlube is basically the same thing or better. And it comes in a giant as far as, gun cleaning comes. It comes in like a quart or 2 quarts, like an engine oil size container. And you can use that like where your barrel rubs against your slide and where your slide contacts the frame. I wouldn't use it on my finer moving parts like a trigger control group, but on big parts like that stuff is phenomenal. It works great. It's super lubricating. It's super viscous. It sticks. It's just awesome for slides and barrels on firearms. I use it on all kinds of firearms, not just Glocks, for things that have, big heavy moving parts that beat around, like a slide in a frame or like the bolt on a Scar 17. That Hyperlube works great, and it's more expensive than engine oil, but it's far cheaper than you're probably going to pay for any kind of gun lubricant. And if it can work on a piston at super high temperatures and super high speeds, it probably works just fine on your Glock. So Hyperlube, it's a great thing not just for Glocks, but for any kind of handgun slide, barrel to slide fit, slide to frame fit on firearms. Hyperlube, another tactical tip. There's a product that's kind of obscure. I forget where I found it. It works on, I believe, the Gen 3 and maybe the Gen 4. It doesn't work on the Gen 5s, but it's from a company called Graham. I think it's TR Graham, but it could be something else, but Graham, like graham cracker, I believe. And it's a little piece that replaces the part that you pull down to release the slide on your Glock. And it's like an accurizing measure. And it's not very expensive. And it works great. It's the piece that I have in my Glock 26 that's mostly factory. I don't know if it's that piece or if it's just happens to be a super accurate gun. But like I said, that little baby Glock 26 will make headshots at 50 yards with iron sights. And if I miss, it's because of me, probably not because of the gun. That little product is amazing, and if you're going to spend money accurizing your Glock, I would start there if it's a Gen 3 or 4. Something Graham, and it's that little piece that you use to disassemble the slide, and it helps with the lockup of the gun. It's an awesome little product. So another tactical tip there for your Glock. Another one, sights. If you want good sights, like I said, a lot of people accessorize their Glock. One of the first things a lot of people do when they buy the Glocks, they kind of consider those front sights and rear sights that come with the Glock, the polymer ones, as disposable. They're kind of just seen as a placeholder for the sights you're going to put on your Glock. So if I'm talking about sights that I like, the tritium fiber optic sights, they both glow in the day and the nighttime. And I like the tritium fiber optic front sight, and I like a straight black rear sight. For any kind of use, for tactical, for practical, anything from competition to duty use, those are the sights that I like, the tritium fiber optic. So check those out, the tritium fiber optic sights. They're just regular night sights. I don't like as much because they only glow at night and they're just regular sights during the day. The tritium fiber optic gives you the glowing sight in the day or the night. And I think that those are really the way to go if you want to check those out. With that, guys, I'll say thanks for listening to this episode of Gunfighter Life, and have a blessed day.